Welcome back. We're going to start the second round of questions. Thank everybody for submitting their questions. We got a ton of questions, so we're going to try to ask different topics than has already been brought up. Again, starting from my left, we have Gloria Cook of the Veterans Coalition Party of Canada. We have Judy Green of the Green Party of Canada. We have Chris D'Entremont of the Conservative Party of Canada. We have Matthew Dubois of the NDP Party of Canada. And we have Jason DeVue of the Liberal Party of Canada. Thank you. Welcome back, guys. When we left off, I think, Chris, you had the last question, so it's Matt's turn. Matt, we had to limit your time when you brought up the ferry, so I'm going to ask the ferry question. Given that the ferry is an international link and the benefits go beyond West Nova, does your party, which you've already stated, support the ferry service? And if so, do you see any other transportation links coming to our area?
As I mentioned, especially as a green initiative, having the ferry, taking cars off the road is a benefit to everyone. It also brings economic benefits to the people, not only in Yarmouth, but up and down the valley along the South Shore. One of the things I like to see, people who were mentioning completion of the 101. Yes, we would have to, for safety, we have to do that. But one of the things I mentioned in one of the other debates is bringing back rail. Rail is a safe and cheap and environmentally friendly way of getting people back and up and down the end from one end of the valley all the way to Halifax. And it's safer. And it's much more civilized.
Thank you. Jason.
Thank you for the question. I am personally in support of the Yarmouth Main ferry link. The current contract is between the provincial government and Bay Ferries, but certainly the federal government has come to support that service on the infrastructure side of things. For example, by the $9 million investment being made in the Yarmouth International Ferry Terminal. And that doesn't only ensure that we have an upgraded and modern facility to welcome visitors to our region, but it also ensures that the terminal meets Canada Border Services Agency standards. It secures those good-paying federal jobs, and it maintains our port of entry to the US. On the other side, I mentioned the completion of Highway 101. Certainly that's a vital road link for anyone living in this area to make sure that we can access services in Halifax, that we can access the Halifax International Airport. And I would be interested in sitting down with any interested group in the area to see if we couldn't do something more here with the Yarmouth Airport.
Thank you. Gloria.
Well, the ferry does bring in people and money to our area, but if it would take vehicles like it used to, the big trucks and stuff, it would probably be a lot more beneficial to us, to the truckers anyway. We get food here faster, goods here faster. I don't really have too much to say on the ferry, actually. If it works for Nova Scotia, then we should have it. If it's costing us money, then we should find some other way to cut the cost. Not necessarily, I mean, get rid of the ferry. I just mean make it more viable. And I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure that the Veterans Coalition Party would soon figure it out. But for myself, I can't say anything more. Thank you.
Do you know your party's stance on the Yarmouth ferry?
I'm not really sure. They do want everything that will bring money into Canada to be here, yes. But I don't know if they weighed the cost against the pros and the cons. Maybe they have, but I'm not aware of it, so I really don't want to speak any more on that fact.
Thank you. Judy?
Well, it's obvious that the Bay Ferry brings in a lot of tourist dollars into our area. We've seen that by the lack of registrations and the loss of income for many business owners in Western Nova Scotia because of the ferry not running this year. There are some serious concerns about how this particular implementation of the ferry happened. There's certainly a lack of transparency in the process. There's a lot of questions about why we are paying for foreign infrastructure and paying for foreign salaries. Certainly to be paying good paying jobs here in Nova Scotia, but I'm sure you understand there's some concerns about paying on foreign soil. I am totally in agreement with upgrading the Yarmouth terminal, making it safe and up to standards, and also having a newer ferry that is more energy efficient. But there are serious concerns about how it was implemented, and I do think there needs to be an investigation into that issue.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Not very fair that I only have a minute to talk about something that's so important. But of course, the Yarmouth Ferry is something that's very important to me and to our party. We need to have those connections, of course, to the U.S. to bring tourists here, but also to get our products back and forth. So, you know, it's been taken a number of years. We need at least 3 years of consistent service to start building the clientele back that we've seen before. And having this year off has not helped anyone, including the merchants here in Yarmouth. I think it was a travesty when the government of the day, the Liberal government of the day, could not tell people in Yarmouth that the ferry would not run this year. If they would have said it back in March, and maybe these organizations and book companies would have been able to advertise differently, but they strung them on and strung them on and strung them on, and I think that was unfair. There's a lot of other issues that we should be dealing with, like the airport, but the ferry, we should have done better.
Thank you. The next question is for Jason, but we have a question from the floor to clarify on something you already said. So I'm just wondering if we could get a short answer from you on this one. When you remarked about the $40,000 loan program, when we were talking about first-time home buyers, was it for first-time home buyers or was it for upgrades? Can you just kind of clarify what that was?
For all homeowners. So it would be a $40,000 interest-free loan to make retrofits, to make homes more energy efficient.
So it's not just first-time?
Not just first-time, all home buyers.
Okay. Now we're going to move over to tax. I have a question from the floor for Jason. The Liberals hurt our family trust structures to where it is almost senseless to have one. Will you, or what is your response to this?
So let me start by saying that the first piece of legislation we introduced and passed when the Liberal Party formed government in 2015 was a personal income tax cut. We saw a tax rate for the second income tax bracket lowered from 22% to 20.5%. And this measure alone saved the average middle-class Canadian nearly $1,000 in the last 3 years. At the same time, we raised personal income taxes on the wealthiest 1%. This was the beginning of the strong fiscal plan that we've put in place over the past 4 years, which has resulted in over 1 million new jobs being created, the unemployment rate at 40-year lows, and 900,000 Canadians being lifted out of poverty. It's also allowed us to start addressing our infrastructure deficits through our historic infrastructure plan. It's allowed us to support small businesses by cutting the small business tax rate from 11% to 9%. Saving them as much as $7,500 per year. And we've all done this while we continued reducing the amount of debt relative to the size of our economy to the lowest amongst G7 countries. To answer the question about changes made to corporate trust, certainly there's been a proliferation of businesses created in the past 15 years. I forget the exact number, but something like 4 times the amount that existed around in the beginning of the early 2000s. And certainly those were being created in a way for tax avoidance. Now, I understand that there are some people here in the room that use these trusts, and rightly so, as a pension fund because they don't have a pension fund where they work. They are self-employed. They have their law practices, their doctor's practices. And certainly we have to make sure that we don't negatively affect these people while ensuring that the wealthiest do pay their fair share.
Thank you. Gloria? Judy?
Well, I do agree that we do need to make our tax laws more equitable. There is a disproportionate number of taxes being paid by the middle class. and there's a lot of people avoiding taxes. So one of the first things we'd like to do is create an arm's length federal tax commission to analyze the current systems for fairness and accessibility based on the principle of progressive taxation, closing tax loopholes used by the very wealthy, the stock option loophole where they only pay half taxes on the portion of their wages that are paid in stock options, capital gains loophole where they only add half of their capital gains to their taxable income. This is 90% of this tax break goes to the top 10% and 85% of it goes to the top 1% of earners. So it's a disproportionate benefit to the uber wealthy. We've got a whole long list of them here. I'll talk to you about them later because I only got 3 seconds left.
Thank you. Chris, this was actually directed to you. Will the PC party return it to where it was if elected the family trust?
Absolutely. So let's look at this first. Is the middle class under this government is paying $800 more per year. So as much as they talk about cutting for the middle class, they did not. It's now costed them more. Jason, don't forget that Morneau called our small business owners tax cheats because they were using the opportunity on small business investments, and they were using tax policy to leave money in their businesses. We're going to exempt spouses from the Trudeau tax increases on small business dividends, and quite honestly, try to make things, and this is probably for the accountants in the room, there's not too many, I see a couple, make it easier to navigate Canada's tax system, and the Canadian Revenue Agency is getting more and more difficult for businesses to call in and get the right answers, or they're always different. So yes, we're going to be repealing those tax changes so that our businesses can get ahead.
Thank you. Matt?
I don't have an election platform on the issue of trust funds. I do remember discussing that at our conventions and whatnot, so I know the answer is out there and I can probably get it for you. The NDP has always been in favor of fair taxes, closing the tax loopholes, trust being one of them. I do know that one of the big issues for trust and with inheritance is like for farming, where leaving family farm property in the business to your children is a very difficult pin, because you don't want to penalize wealth transfer to maintain these family farms. So I invite people to ask me, and I'll see what I can do with looking up more detailed information.
Thank you. This question's for Gloria. We've been hearing a lot about the top 1% of taxpayers. What income thresholds do you think this should apply to? Where should it start, the top 1%?
I'm no millionaire, I don't know. But I'm thinking that if a person makes more money, that they can afford mansions that cost $300-400, well, that's not $300-400, $3-4 million. I think that, yeah, they tax them, rear end right off them. We need people that are normal, everyday people to run a country. We don't need millionaires to do it. We can't live a millionaire's life on minimum wage or low income. We cannot do it. We have to have a government that understands where we're coming from. We need a good pay rate. People can't live on $11.55 an hour and look after their children. I mean, why do you think people aren't having kids today? They can't afford them. We need a government that's going to look after the people, put the money in the people's hands. If the millionaires don't like it, too bad. We need a sensible government. Somebody's going to say, okay, we need people in our country. We're bringing in immigrants by the millions because our people aren't having kids. They're not having kids because we're telling them they don't need them because we're overpopulated. Yeah. We're also telling them that we're going to give these people all this money to live on. Not you. The heck of you. You're just a Canadian. You don't need that money. We need a change in this country to bring the ordinary working person up to a standard of living that they can afford, that they can raise a family on, that their kids don't have to go out to some other country or some other province to make a living. Bring your kids home, raise their families here, let them have an income that they can stay home and look after their kids properly without having to leave them and say, okay, I'll see you next week or I'll see you in 4 weeks.
Thank you. Judy, what would you define the top 1% as?
Well, the number that's kind of been bandied around is anyone making $20 million personal income in a year. Is there anyone here in this room? Makes 20 million? Yeah, so it's none of us, right? So that's kind of been bandied around, but it's more about not necessarily raising taxes, but closing the existing tax loopholes and making sure that the offshore havens are shut down, that unless the company is actually engaged in business activities overseas, then they really are a tax haven, and that's to be shut down. Mark Carney, you know, he used to be a big dude there in the Bank of Canada. He said corporations are holding hundreds of billions of dollars in bank accounts and not reinvesting in local economies. And that's the big problem when people squirrel money away, is it's not flowing back in and fueling our economies. You know, so we need to change that. The tax changes that the Greens are wanting to do are all about closing those loopholes. Thank you.
Chris?
I'm not going to talk about tax policy because I don't have enough information on it, but let's say I agree with Judy here. I don't think anyone here is in the top 1%. Matter of fact, I don't think we're in the top 50%. You know, I think we're responsible, middle-class folks working hard for every cent that we have, and trying to put it away as best we can with all the pressures that we have on us. And we need to be able to save a little more for our future, for our retirement, for our children. And I think we need to work to make sure that those dollars are available to us, which is why we're bringing in a universal tax cut, putting more money in your pocket, the bracket from 15% down to 13.75%, be phased in over a couple of years, 14.5% on January 1, 2021, then 14% on January, down to 14% in 2022. So there's a number of issues that we need to address, and you know, I think it's making things of life affordable for our folks in Western Nova Scotia.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, the NDP is also putting the floor at $20 million, and along with a 1% income tax increase on wealth of that upper 1%. The reason we are only doing 1% is it's cheaper to pay the tax than to put that money offshore and put it into a foreign bank account and protect it that way. So basically, we were trying to make it more livable, more easy for those who can afford it to actually do it without trying to take the funds away. Just as a matter of point, there's 26 billionaires in Canada. What you do with $1 billion, this is more, these are people who earn more than $1 billion. Their Canadian corporations have squirreled away $1.6 trillion, not billion, $1.6 trillion in tax savings and avoided $25 billion a year in paying taxes. There's a lot of money out there that can be shared.
Jason?
I'm not going to provide my personal opinion on who constitutes the 1%. I'm not going to provide the party's opinion on who constitutes the 1%. When Liberal government became in power in 2015, that piece of legislation based on Canada Revenue Agency advice was to create a new tax bracket for anyone making $250,000 and over. Now, I'm not sure if that constitutes exactly the 1%, but I think the number is much lower than what some of our colleagues has alluded to.
Correct, because I happen to be an accountant. So the second question is going to come based on personal tax brackets. The highest tax bracket starts at around $210,000, and it is currently a combined rate of 54% in Nova Scotia. Judy, this question to you: has the line been crossed as to how high a tax should go?
Well, sometimes it's not about how high the tax should go, it's about who's being taxed and about equitable payment of taxes. And that's really what the Greens are really focusing on this election, is making sure that everyone pays their fair share of taxes. And it's really about looking at those who are trying to evade paying taxes and getting them on board. For instance, did you know that some of the largest e-commerce companies in the world, Google, Netflix, Facebook, Uber, and Amazon, don't pay a single penny on the billions of dollars that they make off of Canadians? Not a single penny. We want to change that. We also want to, of course, eliminate the tax write-offs for fossil fuel companies along with other subsidies, and then use that money to help fuel the green economy. But we want to maintain the current tax rates for small and medium-sized businesses. We know that those businesses are the ones that fuel our economies, and that they already have enough of a tax burden. They don't need anything more. We want to be looking at charging a 5% surtax on commercial banking profits. So there's like 43.15 billion in profit in 2018 alone. Caisse Populaire and co-ops would be exempt from this. We want to prohibit Canadian businesses from deducting the cost of advertising on foreign-owned sites, such as Google and Facebook, which accounts for 80% of all advertising spending. That's huge, because they're not taxed on that. We want to eliminate, there's a 50% corporate tax deduction for meals and entertainment, which includes season tickets and private boxes at sporting events. We don't think that the taxpayer should be subsidizing that. But we also want to increase the tax credit for volunteer firefighters in search and rescue. We recognize the important services that they fill in our communities. Thank you.
Chris?
Talking about the larger issue, we also have to have a balance between how much people make and how many jobs they create in our area. We have to depend on job developers who tend to be some of the larger earners, so we have to find a balance amongst those two things. But let's not forget, we need to help the people that are on the lower end of the bracket. Someone earning between $12,000 $69 and $47,630, which is the bracket that we're talking about when it comes to the $850 universal tax cut, to make sure that we target the right people. People say that they're within $200 of insolvency every month. We need to be able to close that gap and put more money so that they can invest it in our local area. They can go out, they can spend money on groceries that they might not normally spend on, and just have those kinds of things that are available to us. So we need to be able to help those folks.
Matt?
As I mentioned, the NDP have been looking at fair taxation and reduction in poverty for the 60 years that we've been around. Could you repeat the question again? There's that 20,000.
Well, the question was, the highest tax bracket currently sits at 54% in Nova Scotia. Has a line been crossed as to how high a tax should go?
No, not really. As I mentioned, there's 84 families, just 84 families in Canada that own the same amount of wealth as the lower 12 million. That's a third of the country's population. It's important that we bring taxation in line with a fairer, more equitable line, because the more money that comes back down, the greater the economy, the more circulation of that funds. Our capitalist system basically concentrates all the wealth, and whoops.
Thank you. Jason?
Certainly by taxing the wealthiest in our society, this is what allows us to move forward on the Canada Child Benefit, for example, that benefits 9 out of 10 families right here in West Nova. The average payment in West Nova for that program is the largest federal expenditure. It's about $5 million a month. That's huge for our economy. We have also committed to raising the personal tax exemption rate to $15,000. Right now it stands right around $11,000. That's going to put about $600 directly in the pocket of those lower income families. Chris mentioned the Conservatives' universal tax cut. That plan's about will approximately help about 64,000 low-income earners. The Liberal plan, according to our estimates, is about 700,000 people. So it is much broader than what the Conservatives would label as a universal tax cut.
Thank you, Gloria.
Well, I think the gravy train should stop. I think that how much you tax depends on your income, yes, and what you're doing with that income. If you're putting back into the community or the country to help create jobs, yeah, go ahead, make your money. But if you're making jobs, we need the jobs, yes. I think we should stop and make sure that they don't have the tax loopholes that they've been benefited by so far. And the faster we get that done, then that's good. We have more money to work with. And I can see that being a priority with any government, to close the loopholes, put the money back in the country where it belongs. Simple as that.
Thank you. Chris, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is calling for a Royal Commission to look into tax reform. The last review was done in the 1960s. The reason we are calling for this is that we believe that the Tax Act has been overcomplicated to the point of an average taxpayer not being able to understand it. Do you agree with this call?
I agree with it because I've had the opportunity to call into Revenue Canada on a number of occasions for different constituents as they've come to my office over the years. I have never seen a system more complicated or convoluted in my whole life. And what's even worse is when you call in and get one answer where you think you're doing the right thing by telling the constituent this is the direction you should take. You call in a couple days later and you get the opposite answer or something that is different. So there has to be a full redo on how our taxation system works, and I would fully support the Canadian Chamber in their ask for this.
Matthew.
Definitely reform of the tax forms are necessary. They do get complicated. For me, personally, when you just have a salary, you can always do it yourself. It's not that hard. But when you start adding children and business income, it just gets more and more complicated. I had to, when I got married, I had to go to an accountant because trying to do income splitting, there's no way you can pick out the right number for income splitting without going to an accountant and using an algorithm. So I don't think that's available to most people. So yes, we definitely have to reform the tax, the way we tax people and the way taxation forms are produced.
Jason?
Thank you. Certainly over the past 4 years, I've seen my fair share of people having trouble with Canada Revenue Agency in terms of paying their taxes and staying on the right side of the law, quite frankly. It shouldn't be complicated to pay your taxes. It shouldn't be burdensome. So certainly if there are efficiencies in the system that we should be looking at, I'd love to have that conversation with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce or any other interested groups. I'm not specifically aware of their recommendation or call. It's the first time I've heard about it tonight. But certainly I think it's every government's role to try to reduce the red tape and make it easier for Canadians and businesses to pay their taxes and allow them to do so.
Gloria?
I think when you go to try to fill out those tax papers, there's a lot of room for error because there's a lot of stuff you can't understand. Years ago, I used to do tax returns for mink ranches. I couldn't do one today, my life depended on it. And I think that's the problem a lot of people are running into. Let's uncomplicate things for the common man. I know the top cream of the crop, the most of the money is coming out of the UNI people because the tax, the elite, they're having their money offshore, they're hiding it, they're buying other businesses out. We don't have that. We just get this great big bill from the Canadian government for our taxes. And it really throws a wrench into our lives and the lives of other ordinary people. We need to have it stop. Simplify everything so that everybody can understand it.
Judy?
The Greens totally support the Royal Commission for Tax Reform. As I mentioned earlier, we're already talking about a federal tax commission to analyze the current systems because they're antiquated. I totally agree that it's far too complicated. And as a computer scientist, I know it doesn't have to be. You know, there's lots of software companies out there that make a lot of money by making it uncomplicated for the average person, but you still have to buy that software. When in fact, Canada Revenue Agency still has to do all of the calculations and verify what you're doing anyway. So there is a stream of thought that they have everything that they need. I know when I was doing my mom's taxes, she wasn't really good in her 80s about keeping her T4s that came to her. Who did I call to get them? I call it CRA because they already have them because the employers have to submit them. So, and the pension plans have to submit them. So I think that there's a lot more complications going into the system that needs to be. It's time for an overhaul. Thank you.
Matthew, a question on firearms in Canada from the floor. What's your party's feel on gun control versus gun bans?
Gun control versus?
Ban.
Oh, okay. I know there's a rural divide, urban-rural divide in gun control. I personally am in favor of gun control. We do have a policy paper on that. I haven't memorized it yet, but one of the things I do believe that any rational person should be able to adopt a reason for having gun control. I believe the long gun registry was set up to fail. Excuse me. No, one of the things is the traceability of firearms, keeping them out of the hands of criminals, and also one of the things I like to say is the socialists aren't going to take away your guns. You know, there's always that fear that the lefties are going to take away the guns once they're registered. And that's not going to be true. But there is a need for traceability. We trace cows. We trace back to what farm, what a bad cow, a diseased cow is. We trace back milk. We can even trace back lettuce to the fields if there's a problem. We should be able to trace firearms back to the manufacturer and whatever hands they go through.
Jason?
I will start off by saying that I support law-abiding gun owners. That also means that I can support further gun control. That is the party policy of the Liberal Party to ban military-style assault weapons. Guns like the AR-15, for example. I don't know anyone, certainly in my circles, who need to go deer hunting with an AR-15. I'm not sure if you do. But that is their approach that the Liberal Party is taking. And when it comes to a contemplated ban on handguns, we are going to let municipalities decide. Municipal governments are best placed to know their local circumstances. We use handguns here in our rural areas for agricultural purposes, for example, and under Liberal government that would certainly not stop. But in cities like Toronto or Vancouver, I certainly do not see the need to carry a handgun in the middle of those downtown cores.
Thank you. Gloria?
Criminals don't care if the country has gun control. It doesn't matter less to them. They can get a gun whenever they want to. But are you going to face that criminal and no gun in your hand? He's going to come in and kill you, kill your kids. But that's okay. You don't have a gun. The country said you couldn't have one, but the criminal could. Now, if you want a gun in Canada, you have to go take a gun course. You have to pass that course. You have to pass a criminal check. A handgun is a whole different license. Not too many people are ever privileged to get that license. Automatic weapons, assault weapons, that's just not happening. If you're finding them kind of guns, it's either from a soldier or a military man that's been allowed to keep it, maybe a police officer, but you're not getting that from the regular people. unless they're a criminal and they're important to gun. So what do we need further gun control for?
Thank you. Judy?
Well, first off, there's absolutely no need for a gun registry. We've seen how that doesn't work out well because law-abiding citizens are not the ones that we're having to focus on. We already have a ban on automatic military-style weapons. What the Green Party is asking for is a ban on the semi-automatic military weapons, not the semi-automatic shotguns that we use on our farms and our rural areas. And there is a rural-urban divide. Where a handgun in a rural situation may be a necessity, but certainly not in an urban situation. More importantly, what we need to be doing is making sure that our RCMP have the funds and training available to be able to stop the importation, illegal importation of illegal weapons into our country that are crossing our borders from our southern neighbors. So as a veteran myself, I've had experience with guns and actually have a sporting rifle marksman from Winchester. So I've enjoyed the sports aspect of it as well, but we need to do so safely, not putting our children at risk.
Thank you. Chris?
We should have the information available to us as we do it. I have to take exception to something that Jason just said, where that farmers can use handguns to use on the farm. Matter of fact, that's illegal. You're only allowed, with your license, to lock your gun up, bring it to a gun range, use it at your gun range, put it back in the box, travel it back home. That is what the license to hold a handgun allows you to do. We don't need to be getting all complicated and letting municipalities come up with their own gun laws, because I'll just create a big smorgasbord of where guns are allowed in the country and where guns aren't allowed in the country. That's just silly. That's just the federal government shirking its responsibility when it comes to making sure that our citizens are safe. Guns in rural areas are seen differently than they are in cities, but at the same time, we don't need the government interfering as much as they do today.
Thank you. Last question of the evening, and it's also from the floor. Jason, we've worked our way back to you. You've commented a few times on internet and cell service, and currently there's hundreds of millions of dollars pledged to rural Canada for rural internet, but with limited or no results. Will you mandate that the CRTC deem this infrastructure an essential service?
Well, certainly I believe having access to high-speed rural internet is an essential service. I won't go as far as mandating the CRTC, because the CRTC is actually an independent body created by government. So they do come up and have hearings, and they come up with their own regulations. We can certainly guide them along, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We've mandated that they should put in place a $500 million fund to provide more access for a rural internet directly from the telecommunications companies. But as a federal government, we have invested hundreds and millions of dollars so that rural and remote communities do have access. I've mentioned some of the communities who have benefited from this funding. I think it's a total of 18 communities across West Nova. Certainly partnering with the provincial government. The provincial government, through offshore royalties, has set aside about $180 million to connect our communities by 2026. And certainly leveraging that money would increase federal dollars, and with dollars from industry, I think we can reach the goal of connecting every Nova Scotian by 2026, no matter where they live. This is really something that we need to get a handle on. We have to be quite forceful as a government to see that these projects are get through.
Thank you. Gloria?
I think internet is a necessity. People are working with the internet. That's how a lot of people make their living. And it should be regulated, but not by the internet companies themselves. It should be regulated by government. The money that they charge should all be on a flat rate level, not that they can't be exorbitantly overcharged. And their service should be up to par. There should be a level that, yes, your company has to put this out, or you're not allowed on the card to sell it. And what you put on that internet, a lot of that is being way over regulated. Actually, I had a fellow here tonight at one point said that the VCP, he'd send a message to me. And guess what? He couldn't send the message because it was against the Facebook regulations. The thing is, that's dictatorship. It wasn't nothing that was going to hurt in the world.
That's time. Sorry. Judy?
Canadians are keenly aware that they pay more for less when it comes to mobile and internet services. This is due largely to an anti-competitive climate in which Canadian telecommunication companies operate. Big companies like Bell and Rogers lobby heavily for regulations and legislation that cost consumers more and leave the most vulnerable in our society unable to afford service, which deepens the digital divide between those who can afford comprehensive internet services and those who can't. In today's society, internet access is becoming more and more necessary for such basic services as job seeking, government services, banking, healthcare, and much more. The Green Party will take action to ensure a competitive climate by breaking up the telecom monopoly and giving smaller companies a chance to compete fairly. The high data fees charged by companies that monopolize this sector, like Bell and Rogers, are creating that deep digital divide. We need to make high-speed connectivity a basic need. It is a basic need. We need to make it a basic right, especially in rural Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Chris?
So the report that the province of Nova Scotia did a couple of years ago at this point, in order to get everybody connected in Nova Scotia, it was going to cost somewhere near $700 million. So you can understand the magnitude of the problem that we have here. And it's not only that, you know, we don't have telephone wires going to a house, we don't have cable going to a house. It's the age of that equipment that's not capable of accessing a modern infrastructure, a modern internet service. So we need to be able to work with the provinces to leverage the dollars that they have, to work with the municipalities, but to have something consistent where we're not picking one community over another. We need to make sure that everybody has fair access as we go along. But it also means working with some of the providers. They do have a huge amount of infrastructure invested in our provinces across Canada, and we should be able to leverage their interest or their expertise in making sure that all Canadians have access to this fundamental right.
Matthew?
The NDP support internet as a basic right, not just rural but across the board. This gives me an opportunity to say there is an election platform policy where we will be putting a cap on internet fees and phone fees. That's one way of helping save money. The economic benefits for everyone, and also I also see having high-speed internet as protecting some of the cultural values that we have here in West Nova. We have a large Acadian population. Having access to high-speed internet would help protect the French language by allowing people to communicate better and be more connected.
Thank you. So that concludes our question session, and as promised, you get 2 minutes to do a closing statement. We're going to do it in the reverse order as you picked randomly to start with, and if I remember correctly, that puts Chris first.
Thank you very much to the Chamber for putting on this event. It's always a very important part of our democratic process to make sure that we hear from all candidates. I want to thank my candidates, my acquaintances, my colleagues as we go along this process. I want to thank my neighbors and friends and supporters who are here tonight. It's these relationships that make living in Yarmouth County absolutely worth it. Anne, Andre, and Alec, I want to thank, and I want to thank you for the support that we received from this great community. We decided a long time ago that we were going to bring up our voice here, and I'm so proud of the support that this community and how this community has built our boys who are our men today. Electors in West Nova have a decision to make. Stick with the failed policies of Justin Trudeau, where more people are falling behind, or a Conservative government led by Andrew Scheer, they'll be focused on you getting ahead. We live in a riding that is full of opportunity. We need to be able to grasp what's before us. not limited. Our fishery has taken care of our families for generations, and through real consultation and support, we can work together to make it even better. The riding of West Nova is very diverse in its culture and its economy. We need to continue to be leaders in the environment, forestry, farming, and of course, tourism. We need an MP that works hard for the citizens of West Nova, that has a proven track record of successes, and one who understands rural issues. My name is Chris D'Entremont. I'm the Conservative candidate for West Nova, and on October 21st, I ask for your support.
Thank you, Chris. And next is Matthew.
Good evening. Thank you to the Yarmouth Board of Commerce, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here, and thank you to my esteemed candidates. I remembered what that question about housing was. One of the things the NDP is going to do is to impose a tax on foreign ownership to suppress speculation. I invite you to take some of the literature over there with my contact information. Obviously, 1 minute is not good enough time, especially for me to give you the full details of my policies of the NDP and my feelings on certain issues. One of my big issues is electoral reform, and I would love to talk to you about that and why we need electoral reform to bring a greater voice to West Nova. I invite you again to chat with me or contact me later. And to keep democracy going, it's important that we vote. And I implore everyone here to at least make that decision. Whoever you think is best, whatever you think is best, to go out and vote. Now, we've just spent almost 2 hours here, an hour and a half, listening to us, and I want to hear from you. It's one of the things I like to do. I've spent my life serving the public, and I want to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy is next.
Thank you for everyone who's remained here for this very long evening. I see we're missing a few in the chairs, but thank you so much for the Chamber of Commerce for organizing this meeting and for all of you to spend your evening here with us tonight. What you're doing is you are participating in one of the core values of the Green Party called participatory democracy, which means that each of us looks at what the values are that are important to us, what are the issues that are important, and we challenge each of the candidates. And I think you've done a fabulous job of that right here tonight. Challenge us and then align yourself with the candidate who's going to best represent you. Because although in Canada we think we elect the Prime Minister, we in fact only elect our local representative. And I encourage you